Hello, hi, it's Jason here from the Crypto Cycle channel with another video focusing on the Bitmap standard. This time round, I want to focus on something that I regularly do with construction projects, which, if you would have seen in my last video, I spoke a little bit of my background that I come from the construction and developer in terms of the physical, construction of buildings sectors. So I just thought I would this time round go through something that I've been discussing recently with a few colleagues. A few people on sort of like the Discord and Twitter, and it's something which I think, especially the newcomers that have been sort of entering this space, they sort of prompted me perhaps to make this video because I thought actually it would probably be a really good idea to follow a similar sort of like a risk assessment or a consideration exercise on potentially on some of the queries that some may have on why they, why, could the bitmap standard be flawed? Um, and I really thought it was important to cover this because obviously, it's something that I strongly believe in, and something I'm extremely excited about. So the last thing I want is sort of newcomers to this space that perhaps have missed out on it to start, sort of, I don't know, causing some, I don't know, putting rumours and FUD and all sorts of essentially putting the project down. So I thought, well, it'd probably be a good idea just to go through a similar exercise, like I say, like I was saying earlier about how we do it actually when we're trying to assess an opportunity, I guess. And I I actually think it's probably still relevant, and probably quite a good idea to do on the bitmap. Now, this is something that we generally call, and to be honest, depending on what organisation that you'd work for, they have their own sort of acronyms and their own, their own sort of I don't know, abbreviations of what they call this sort of process. But I'm used to something called like this, the reviewing the circles of risk. So I basically prepared a little PowerPoint presentation because there isn't any sort of material out there that I could, sort of, I don't, well, I haven't come across it, any material out there that I could potentially, duplicate or, and then take you through it, or even just a simple website that explains it all. So I thought I would go through it. However, as I was going through this process, um, and you'll see when I come to present the PowerPoint presentation, um, it became quite clear that actually there are probably a number of considerations that, I think truly we need to challenge ourselves as bitmap holders. Um, and I think it's something definitely worthwhile us understanding how, like say, people that perhaps have missed their opportunity, um, even though there are still opportunities, but maybe want to find an excuse for not getting involved, perhaps. So hopefully, this video will provide, the, I don't know, the naysayers, or perhaps you're unsure at the moment watching this video if this is something that you can see value in, and we'll, but we will go through it, we'll discuss it, and I will say my sort of like, closing out sort of summary of what we'll go through, and we'll see if you concur with what I'm saying. And I'm happy to be challenged on it. I'm happy for comments. I'm happy for anything because ultimately, this is all about us bouncing ideas off each other. Um, and even though I've come up technically with these sort of key circles of risk or considerations. And one thing I must bear in mind is that as I was going through one of the circles of risk, um, I I realised that it was going to be too much for me to create one entire video out of, because as I was literally going through one of them, which we'll come on to, um, I realised there were so many questions that needed answering, and also probably I had to take a slight step back to make those who perhaps haven't done their own full due diligence or have read much into the space. I mean, this has been a great exercise for me because it's definitely educated myself, and it's, I'd like to, if anything, it's actually made me feel even more confident about the bitmap standard. And I'm going to use a comparison later on in this video. Um, and it really excites me and makes me tingle. And honestly, I don't know if anybody else is potentially seeing what this has, um, the absolute potential in becoming. Um, but we'll get straight into that. Right. So what you can see on the screen is generally the sort of format that we present our circles of risk. Now, you'll see that only one of them is listed. As I said earlier, we're only going to be concentrating on one of the key risks or key considerations in this video, and that is about inscriptions, the inscription.bitmap as the standard. And we'll come on to that, and hopefully you'll start understand why. Um, I think it's really important for us to just grasp this idea that we are all getting behind ultimately the .bitmap standard, the inscription written as .bitmap. So, as it says on the slide, to identify if the .bitmap theory concept is an opportunity or risk. That is what all these different, as you can see with my mouse, all these different circles ultimately, when we get to, I mean, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to have potentially, depending on um, how I get on with the other considerations or risks, um, fundamentally, I might end up having to produce 6 separate videos for this, going through as much as I can in detail through each one. And I think, hopefully this sort of series of videos, and we get to the end of this review ultimately of all the circles of risk. I'm genuinely hoping, and I don't know today because I haven't done them all. But I'm hoping by the time we get to the end that we can sit back and genuinely say that this seems like a really sort of concrete and sound theory concept to still continue backing, supporting, um, and really, I'm hoping that it's just going to give personally myself and hopefully you guys as viewers even more confidence with the real potential that this has. So let's start asking the questions that genuinely people have been, um, and let's try to answer them in this video. So, like I said earlier, we're concentrating on the key risk or consideration of the inscription.bitmap as the standard. So, the first obvious question is it possible for there to be an alternative inscription standard used currently? And the answer is yes. And to be honest, I've already started seeing it. I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it on other social spaces where others are trying to come up with their own different standards, and some people are inscribing these other standards. I mean, I wouldn't even say they're standards necessarily. They're just another abbreviation. I mean, I've got some examples here, not necessarily that this is what is uh, being used or what I've been seeing. But if I go onto Unisat, like I showed in my last video, I could put a block number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and inscribe that with .bitland or dot bitworld or dot bit universe. You get it. I mean, even a totally different name. So when I think of this question, I think, oh, okay, well, what sort of risk does this possess? And I'm thinking, well, perhaps at the moment, the only risk that I can see with this is that perhaps like a large organization or an influential person or team of people, could they grab this idea and be able to spread it to the masses quicker, that make people get behind this, sorry, behind the alternative inscription? Potentially, potentially. However, I would like to hope and genuinely believe that we, knowing that .bitmap is the first, um, is is hopefully the official sort of like recognized standard, and everything else is just a copy. And when I mean, a copy, um, that these other inscriptions could just be considered as a copy, I'm seeing it like, again, not to sort of discount them and say, oh, they're never going to have any value or anything like that. But I'm also seeing another sort of a synergy here with the internet, essentially, with .com. To me right now, .bitmap is the equivalent of .com. Um, and the other iterations that came after .com, I don't know, .co.uk, .eu, .us, whatever whatever. I mean, there's tons of them, .net, etc. They almost become secondary, and ultimately they're not really the sort of first go-to that people want. Normally, people only go to those names because they can't find what they originally wanted under, I don't know, a .com, let's say. Do you get me? Um, and that is where I'm seeing synergy with .bitmap. It feels like a very similar, um, something really, really similar to get behind. And exactly that, because they're the first recognition within this space. And ultimately, what really everyone wants to get. Um, so I see that as not a risk at the moment. I see that as a positive. Um, and you know, in the long term, hopefully it'll be seen to be the case, and .bitmap is what people want. Brings us on to the next question. Okay, but why can someone else produce an alternative standard? I've already inscribed .bit as you know on a particular block, but the reason that others can do it is because Bitmap Holder doesn't technically physically own the block, um, in that sort of physical sense. Well, who owns the block? I think it's a valid question. Well, ultimately, nobody does. However, from doing a little bit of digging and a bit of research, initially the block is actually attributed to the mine of whoever mined the block, um, or shall I say, whoever successfully mined the block. Um, but okay, so they own it temporary. What does that even mean? Well, what do they get out of it? Well, they get the fees associated to the sort of like processing fees for the block, and obviously the Bitcoin out of it as a reward. And, sorry, when I mean fees, it's like the transaction fees that they ultimately they get out of it, and then but there's technically no current other standard out there that or a general consensus that shows that the miners own the block. It goes back into the network essentially, and because it's decentralized and part of a chain, it just continues. But I say there is, from what I can see, I mean, if you know something else, please put it in the comments. But I cannot see that anyone physically owns the block. Hence, at the moment, we've got this, potential for other inscriptions to take place. Thought naturally it then would prompt someone to ask, well, what exactly is a block? Um, and I did mention it in my last video when I showed the map of what it looks like, and essentially where I guess this idea of them inscribing .bitmap came from, which was on the mempool. And obviously you can see what's on the bit feed. And it's ultimately where all the transactions are stored and encrypted on the block. And as it says on the slide, they are created when miners or block validators successfully validate the encrypted information in the block header, which prompts the creation of a new block. That is what it is. That is all it is. Okay. So hopefully that's useful to know. And then again, it's like, well, as I where is this block? Where is it stored? Where is it saved? Is it in some sort of secret chest somewhere? Is it in some sort of centralized computer? And well, no, the answer is not. It's as it says right there. Currently, no one person or entity owns the block. That's right. Um, yeah, it's on a decentralized, distributed ledger, not stored in one place or controlled by one entity. Block exists in a network via systems and computers known as nodes. Each node has one copy of the blockchain. Pretty straightforward. So you know that it isn't just stored in some server or in some computer in the middle of nowhere. It is in some sort of cloud, some ledger that with all the nodes and computers, everything, systems connect with each other, it's all in existence, not centralized. And that is, why we like ultimately Bitcoin. Then again, assessing the risk. Well, can the block be removed? No. The block numbers need to remain in a chain. That's how it works. Blockchain. It's consecutive numbers. You can't just take one out. So the risk there, again, could you inscribe .bitmap on a block and can that block be removed? And could you lose it? From what I can understand and from the research I've done, and obviously following the logic of blockchain, the answer is no. And remember, we are talking about the Bitcoin blockchain. So, okay, so in theory, no one person or entity owns, the block permanently. Yeah. These blocks seem like they've become like a byproduct um, of verifying transactions ultimately. Um, and obviously, then we have this standard .bitmap created, um, and it all makes sense. So far it makes sense. So far, from the questions we've reviewed, I'm not seeing any concerns just yet. And I guess I know I used the .com example earlier. Um, then when I start thinking of it, like also in the physical world, in the physical sense, you know, on 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 my previous video, I mentioned about it's this essentially it's like this organic virtual terrain that's created. And you can then sort of compare it to you know the the home we live in, the land that our home is on. The land was not generated by anyone or is technically really owned by anyone. It's just because we've accustomed to this sort of centralization that you know government and depending on where you live, Her Majesty or His Highness, the King, like here in the UK, own. Ultimately is their land, and then you then buying the land off them essentially because it's just that's what unfortunately we've been accustomed to. Um, and when I then think of the dot bitmap, again, if you think about when you purchase something now, and I assume like somewhere in the States, in your individual states, um, you've got something like similar to what we have in the UK, where when you buy a property, for example, it comes with a title deed which is issued by the land registry. And I find that it's very, very similar to that process ultimately. So I guess in theory, you know, with what I just explained with regards to, like for example, how it is here in the UK, you get your title deeds from the land registry that dictates essentially your ownership rights for your whatever it is, your building, your land, your apartment building or apartment. So I see at the moment why I don't see why this dot bitmap standard cannot be you know the potential virtual parallel, sort of running parallel system, especially when we're talking about the metaverse here as well. Um, I think that's really important because, like I say, when I first visualized this journey with Bitmap, I saw straight away how this just organically connects, the Bitmap and Metaverse, and how that all just makes sense. I mean, please watch my previous video that hopefully shows why I really resonate well with this, from that perspective. So I see this standard. Why can't it be no different to the land registry? We see that it just makes absolute sense. It's the first idea about using this protocol, um, and ultimately, I genuinely see that there should be an agreed consensus, for this to be the way to prove the digital ownership of the blocks because no one else has claimed it. No one else has attempted to make uh, a claim like that before. So this should, in theory, deserve the first claim. Um, and again, it should carry that weight in future that it is essentially the dot com, the sort of Rolls Royce um, uh, of the names of the standards that can be applied in this situation. Um, and you know, I I was really sort of thinking about, like what the name of this video perhaps should be called, um, instead of it being called circles of risk or particular considerations we need to have with bitmap. And honestly, the more I think about it, and even then looking back at this sort of review that we've done with just one of the key sort of considerations, key risks. I just see that is Bitmap the new .com for the metaverse? How the .com was for the internet, .bitmap could be for the metaverse, and that really is where I pretty much want to end this video, with just that thought in your mind, um, because that is really ultimately where I see that this is going. And we looked at this fundamentally with this this sort of key risk of the inscription.bitmap as the standard. What could floor it in the perspective of how valid is this sort of inscription? How robust is this inscription as an idea? And ultimately, I don't see why that there should be any issue with it. So this brings me probably onto this point, before I end this video, that I guess the indexers play such an important and critical role in this, and it does leave, I guess, only one hanging question for me, which I hope to answer in one of the upcoming videos, and that is, well, with an indexer who ultimately carries, I guess, the responsibility of ensuring that the correct party, the correct owner of the bitmap is correct. So, like I showed in my last video, that there may have been some inscriptions of that particular block number, under the bitmap standard. That you might have 2, 3, 4, many more people trying to get it. And it's that validation of who it was the first to inscribe, ultimately who then owns that block under the .bitmap standard. And that is where I think the indexers play such a critical role in all of this, to ensure that that is all correct. And I guess ultimately we need to get to a point where there is an official and recognized, um, a place ultimately where we know that if it's on there, it's trusted and that is correct. I mean, at the moment, the one that I've been using is Unisat, and that so far seems reliable. And honestly, that is the one I am genuinely using to confirm that mine are in fact uh, under my ownership. So yes, this is incredibly important. And the reason I'm also sort of bringing this into the picture, perhaps, which I probably should have explained beforehand, is just like you have the land registry ultimately verify that you are the owner of a property here in the UK. I'm seeing that that is also the indexer's role, but it's getting them, I guess, to be that sort of official stamp of approval almost, to ensure that your claim to that block under .bitmap standard is valid. And ultimately, what is going to be in your virtual wallet, or your keys, or whatever, wherever you're storing your bitmap inscriptions. So that was something I just wanted to sort of leave you guys with at the end, because it is incredibly important. Like I say, I can then sort of comfortably say that by reviewing this, you know, inscription .bitmap as the standard, to be able to claim your blocks ultimately, or claim the Bitcoin blockchain block, should I say. I think through everything that we've gone through, I'm happy at the end of this to say, I don't believe it is a risk, and I believe it passes. And I believe that for the reasons I've stated in this video, it it's actually a really good start to this review. Um, and if anyone wants to have a counter argument, I guess, around, oh, anyone can just use any other standard, or it's not standard, but any other sort of inscription name, etc., to claim the block the Bitcoin blockchain block. I guess my closing statement to that is, well, yeah, they can right now. But as of today, or as of the moment you're watching this video, or the date that this video goes out, it's the only recognized standard that I feel that has the general community consensus to say that this is the one that we're going to use. This is the inscription that we recognize as the most valid to claim ownership of those blocks. And as I said, the indexes play a huge part in that. And ultimately, like I said, this bitmap is right now the equivalent of .com to what the internet is. Bitmap is the standard to virtual land ownership in the Bitcoin blockchain for the metaverse. So with that, thank you for watching this video. I will continually look to research the other key risks on this bitmap, or other considerations that are perhaps valid, that we should all be mindful of, and explore them and see what potential issues or concerns that one may have, and look to answer them and provide comfort ultimately, if possible, of course, not trying to preempt the conclusion. But please, if there is anything you can think of for the time being that you think actually should be considered, I'd be more happy to do a review. And if it means it's more than 6 circles of risk and it becomes 7 or 8, etc., or maybe what you raise, I can fit it in with one of these other 6 that I am currently envisaging to do a video on, and ultimately review for us all as a community. So look, thank you very much for watching. Obviously, I leave you with the slide that we have on the screen. And like I said, the first review has, or the first key risk has passed, which is great. I'm really pleased. So I didn't at the start, wasn't too sure where it was going to end, but I think that's a great start. And like I said, I think this just reviewing the inscription.bitmap as the standard has given me absolutely more confidence for the reasons in this video that it is without doubt um, still an extremely exciting opportunity, and I think everyone should be excited about this. So yeah, until next time, thank you.